Welcome to our Birds of a Feather session, how open source is beating the market, the VC case for COSS. My name is Hilary Carter. I lead research at the Linux Foundation, and I am your moderator of a fireside chat. I'm going to give a quick introduction and then join Matt and Sam on the panel. But today I have the esteemed honor and privilege of sitting with two of our three report co-authors, Matt Lavergne, partner at Serena, and Sam Boysel, data scientist here at the Linux Foundation. And for those of you who joined our keynote session this morning, you heard from Matt Lavergne at Serena already, presenting our new research project, the 2025 State of Commercial Open Source. And today we're going to dive into a little bit more about the report in terms of methodology and contextualizing the findings for venture capital. And really this conversation is about where community meets the market. So without further ado, I'm going to put the report up on the screen, and why don't I just keep it there for our conversation? Or no, you know what? Here's our report for those of you who want to take a quick scan. I'll return to the slide with headshots of our panelists, and then we'll kick off. Welcome, Matt and Sam. Thank you for joining us here for a deeper dive into our report published just today. So this is where capital meets community. I want to start off this discussion big with a big question and warming up with big thinking. So Matt and Sam, both of you, what's the big number from the report, and why is it so important to each of you?
From my perspective, I look at community, the knock-on impact of funding on the community outcomes. Not on? But no? Yeah? All right. Okay. So to answer these questions, there's always this concern about money flowing into open source. Is it a good? Is it an evil? And despite any anecdotal evidence, we take a step back and provide a lot of data points to answer this question, and we find that it's on net a positive thing. Money flowing into communities doesn't dampen growth; it actually might even accelerate them in some cases. We find that if you were to look at the correlation between how critical or vibrant or integral a project is, it's these highly valuable companies that are driving these communities. So it's the big number here isn't necessarily a number, but it's this finding that the value of open source, both on a community perspective and a commercial perspective, can coexist and actually kind of feed back into one another.
Yeah, as for me,
Middle mic.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I guess for me, there are a lot of important numbers in that report, of course. I think it comes down to two things. It's the fundraising journey for open source company that is being deconstructed by the report by saying that it's easier, and the exit valuation that we get for open source company that are superior to closed source company, which is also deconstructing the myth that open source doesn't deliver good results. If I had to pick one number, I think the velocity of fundraising will be the one that I'd pick. I hear as an investor all the time that it takes a lot of time for open source company to achieve success. Well, it's just not true. It's even the opposite, right? When you look at the number, the time in between rounds is much shorter for open source company as opposed to closed source, and I think that's a marvelous number to get.
Amazing. This report is the second version of an earlier report published by Serena this year. And Matt, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the first iteration of this report and a little bit about that methodology and the motivations for our collaboration. It'd be great to tell this group about that.
Well, I guess I've been a consumer of open source for as long as I can remember. My dad put me on a terminal when I was 8, so I've used open source for a while on the consumer side. And when I come to the investment world, I was on the other side of the spectrum, and I was surprised to hear all those investors saying, that's open source is the worst business model that you can come up with. What would you give something away for free that you can sell? All those kind of things. So I think I had the intuition that it's just not true. And the motivation for the report was to go into the data and find like some factual thing around why open source is great for software companies. And so that what get me motivated in the first place. I think coming back to Linux Foundation, I've been connected through a mutual friend with Matt Trifiro from the Commercial Open Source Startup Alliance, previously at the Linux Foundation. We had a very strong alignment on demonstrating open source through merits and not just like stereotypes or ideological ideas. So we immediately think that would be something very interesting to dig on. And moving on to, like getting to refresh the report, I think the community aspect was a great add-on. We were very superficial on the way we analyzed the community metrics in the first reports, and I'm super happy that we could dive more in depth into the different metrics that we have in the community.
So a quick follow-up on that. How did you come to our collaboration and what was the significance of the collaboration with the Linux Foundation in this new version of the report?
Yeah, I think it's just repeating myself a bit. I think it's the community aspect of it. So in the first report, we had this thing around GitHub stars, and we had no correlation at all between valuation and GitHub stars. Which was a bit deceiving, but data don't lie. So I guess like getting deeper into the different metrics that you can get and finding the right correlation to demonstrate the value of the community in some ways in a business context. I think that was the addition to the report, I think. And
it all have been well received. The conversations that you've had today, the first version of the report.
Yeah, I think it's been overwhelmingly positive. On the founder side, it's people like founders, open source founders felt better understood, talking about the report and connecting with them about it. They are happy that they can be evaluated on merits rather than on stereotypes. That's one thing. On the investor side, I think we have had a lot of traction as well. A lot of people even using the report in their own investment committees just to prove that it's not going to be bad to invest in an open source company. And last but not least, we had no pushback from like any community saying that business is bad for open source, this kind of thing. So overall, like very positive. I think it's and I hope that it's going to be the case in the next few weeks.
So far, so good. It's great when your Slack or your email doesn't blow up after the release of the report. That's a good sign. So from our point of view, so far so good. So thank you. Sam, you led the analysis of the community metrics and really a net new contribution to the work that Serena had previously done. Tell us a little bit about the process of the community metrics and how did you link a community to the companies. If you could break that down for us.
Yeah, so Matt and Serena did all the hard work by identifying a set of companies and most importantly, their GitHub orgs. And this set of companies includes firms that have received venture funding in the past, and we know when they received it and how their GitHub repositories have evolved over time. And so my job was to really link this funding with durable signals of community traction, things that people are actually doing in these communities, how the communities are responding before and after funding, and as well as how the scale of funding and valuations correlate with these underlying fundamentals. Because that's really what a VC is investing in, is they're looking at a community that has built a user base, a durable user base, widespread usage. People are happy and keep relying on this project. They're using these tools to develop further. That's a really important signal when you see downstream dependency relationships being formed, downloads going up, it shows that even if money's flowing into the system, that the net benefit outweighs the net risk for downstream consumers on average, right? We can always pick out small anecdotal evidence to run in the contrary, but our finding suggests that on average, money flowing into the community is a positive thing, or at least it does not lead to a total collapse of these communities. So I think our task was really to map important signals, meaningful signals like contributor diversity, organizational diversity, release frequencies, these types of things that are all aggregated into an important thing called the OpenSSF criticality score, which we discussed at length in a previous section. But it's a useful composite that takes all these community metrics and gives you a number at the repository level. How widely used, how popular is this piece of software? And we show that the companies that receive the highest deals, that are the most valuable, on average have higher scores. They curate a lot of important and integral communities. So that was my challenge, and that was really fun to find.
Great. And Matt, you'll elaborate on how you came up with the list of the COSS companies in the first place.
I did the question, I think. But that was a very nitty-gritty work. What we've done is we've made this list of 800-ish commercial open source companies, so defining by companies that have an open source component to their offering, and that have raised money from private investors, right? So that was 800 companies. We mapped them with their GitHub repo, the main one, the most starred one. And then we built a control group of 60,000 software companies, closed sourced, that we used to actually make the comparisons. So when we say companies are raising faster, we compare those 800 companies to a subset of these 60,000 that are resampled for geography and category to make sure that we compare apple to apples.
Excellent. Sam, did you want to discuss further the OpenSSF criticality score in terms of factoring the elements together and how the OpenSSF criticality score matches up to business fundamentals?
Yeah, so the criticality score is a metric by the OpenSSF designed to identify projects that are super critical to the open digital infrastructure and might benefit from cybersecurity improvements. Our use case is much different. We're still looking at using the metric to signify this is a integral project, this is widely used, this is widely dependent on, but we want to correlate that with valuation. So what goes into the OpenSSF criticality score would be stuff like distinct contributor counts, organizational diversity, a few other things that we've mentioned previously. It could be like issue activity, it could be release cadences, number of downstream dependencies. And so we look at both the composite as well as the individual elements, and it's encouraging to find that there's positive correlation with value across all these individual elements as well as the composite score. And what has the strongest correlation is the score itself. So all the independent elements might help signify value, but it's these composites that might be helpful for a VC as part of their screening methodology to take these individual signals, and instead of using a vanity metric like GitHub stars, why don't we also factor in durable things that might signify community growth or user base or uptake, and that would be downstream usage would be the biggest one for me.
So that's a nice segue to my next question is, now that we have these community metrics, Matt, this one's for you, what do you think the impact will be among members of the VC community to this insight?
Well, I guess, OSS savvy investor, they don't need the report to understand like what's a great technology and why like a strong community brings value to a company. I think other investors, they need to go beyond stars. What we've seen, what I observe in the future is, in the past is, you've got some investor, they try open source, they say, we've invested in this company because they have this insane number of stars, and then, it doesn't work out like they expect it to be. And so they come back with this thing that says, GitHub stars doesn't mean nothing, and open source is a very bad business model and stuff like this. So I guess for me, if this report brings the broader VC community to look further than stars and understand these different metrics in community and evaluate communities in a deeper way, I think that would be definitely a win. And then long term, I think community cannot be only reduced to metrics. And if you look at what is a successful commercial open source company, it's beyond community. I think it's the developer user, which is the user. Then you have the buyer persona, which is reacting very differently. There is the articulation between the project and the commercial offering. And this, I think, is very specific to infrastructure software and especially to open source. And I guess, like getting investor from there are stars to understanding the full spectrum of what is an infrastructure software company. I think that will be the main goal of report like this.
Excellent. All right, Sam, next one is for you. What fascinated you or surprised you about some of the traction metrics, like 8 times tendency toward dependent projects among commercially supported open source projects, and 7 times increase in downloads following funding?
Yeah, I think that's just the scale of open source, I think always kind of amazes all of us. So the fact that money's flowing into the community and I'm downloading the project more often, I'm also forming more dependency relationships with this project, means that it's like a durable signal that this commercial open source product will be around for a while if it receives funding. It's maybe one way to think about paying the maintainers is it's money flowing in and providing development bandwidth for critical infrastructure. So I think it's always surprising that just the 8x in number of dependencies kind of surprises me, who my prior might have been. Maybe there's a scaling back in the number of dependency relationships. If we see venture capital moving into an open source project, maybe there's potential for some type of rug pull, and so downstream users react defensively and switch dependencies or fork or something like that. That may happen in isolated cases, but what we find is on average that that's not happening. It's net positive for the community.
Right on. Matt, were you surprised to see the correlation of community with COSS companies, or did you go into this with the hypothesis that the results would show what they showed?
Yeah, a bit of both, I think. I guess the intuition was a strong community with support, security, extensibility. I think it's, for me, it was pretty clear that it brings value to a software company. So that was the intuition, right? But then when we looked at the data in the first place, we observed no correlation between stars and valuation. So it was kind of a big shock for us. And at the same time, I was super frustrated because if you look at the 25-ish public open source company on the market today, all of them, they started with a very vibrant community, like even before they were companies, right? So we had to put that because the data was the data, right? And so no correlation between stars and valuation, but at the same time, I was super frustrated. So that's when we did the additional research. I think the granularity of the findings were great because it's just demonstrated the intuition.
Excellent. All right, this one's to both of you. Which vanity metrics do teams over-rotate on? Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I'll take the easy one. Sorry, Matt. We're always hammering GitHub stars. I wouldn't say they contain zero information. They probably contain between 0 and perfect information. So I think just use them as part of your toolkit. But if I had something like contributor growth, durable a usage metric like number of downloads, number of unique installs, number of unique corporate installs, I would much rather use that because that's more closer to something that an actual VC would evaluate in terms of user base or continued usage, or how has giving away a base product for free scaled my priced good. At its core, this commercial open source model isn't a secret. we're giving away an open product and we're selling a price good as a complement. And so open source provides a way to like supercharge the distribution of that free complementary open source product. So I think that, you know, GitHub stars doesn't really contain a lot of that information, and it's also subject to manipulation, and it could even be like a, you know, I've heard it speculated as a new threat vector for supply chain attacks. So over-reliance on any one metric is problematic, and GitHub stars, where all I have to do is click something, is not a meaningful signal of my use of that product, right?
I think maybe one caveat on stars is, of course, there are no guarantee of good business. That's probably a given. But the way I use it is when you look at a certain segment or subcategory in software, like say, you know, I've looked at all those MCP stuff in the IDE where, you know, you build context around what you're coding with COSSA or equivalent. When you look at these different companies, they range in the same kind of bracket for stars, right? So it's no guarantee it's going to be good business, but when you want to pick the right company, I think you certainly want to pick the one that is on the upper bracket of the stars number, as opposed to the one that is outside the bracket or that is on the low end of the bracket.
Great. Another one for both of you. We've talked about correlation. Is there causality where funding creates the community uplift, or does the community uplift create the funding?
Yeah, so just being very transparent, we don't imbue any causal interpretation to our results. So we're not saying that funding causes community traction. We're not saying that it's this latent community traction that attracts funding. The reality is it's probably a little bit of both, and there's probably a bit of feedback along the way. So I think in future iterations of this study, we would do better to identify a setting where we could do some type of causal analysis. It's hard to do with observational data, but I think it's certainly worthy to do. One thing we do find is that at the early stages of these companies' funding journey, there's very little correlation between criticality, community metrics, and valuation, and that correlation increases as the community matures. So you could say that the funding, just looking at that lens, you might be able to infer that the funding has some positive causal impact on community growth. But I think in reality, it's too mixed, and there's a little bit of both going on.
Matt, anything you want to add?
No further comment.
All right, no further comment. Matt, this one is for you, and it's about OKRs. And if you were setting OKRs for seed stage COSS projects, what would they look like?
Yeah, well, so I guess it falls down into two categories. We see companies that are kind of pre-community or at the very early stage of their community building, and then we see companies that start with an existing project. They are new companies, but they build on top of a very established community. So those two cases are very different. I think the first one, we really focus on what's the adoption look like in the open source project they build, the unpaid one. What's the dependency that are being built by developer from the original project? What is the type of engagement? Where is it coming from? You know, the geographies. Is it from the US? Is it from Europe? Is it from Asia? Does it come from enterprise? Does it come from research project? So we really look at this thing. And I think ultimately what we want to see developer using it in large companies, enterprise, in mature markets, so that would be the US mostly and Europe. And we want to see that grow. So that's for like pre-community or early days of community. Other companies, they start with a community, and we move to, I think, another layer. We want to see how do you move from something that has product market fit for the developer, but how do you achieve product market fit from a business standpoint? So then the question is, what's the segue from the project to the buyer persona? So assuming this project is adopted among enterprise and is being used by developer at enterprise, what's the trigger for the developer at the organization to come to his boss and say, we need to buy from this company? Or what is the trigger for like a boss saying, well, we are using it at scale at our company, we need to secure it, and we need to probably pay for it. So we really look at this and what's the level of understanding of this company when it comes to addressing the enterprise and the buyer persona. So coming back to the question, I think in terms of KPI, the second one is harder to prove, right? It's more of a what's the value proposition? What's the framework for the complex sales to come? So I think it will be more quantitative than qualitative than quantitative.
Very good. There's a hand up, and I'd be delighted to give the opportunity for a question.
Yeah, I had a question about your two different groups of the people who started with a project versus the people who didn't, whether you looked at success rates differently between those two groups, because it's a really interesting area.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Did you look at the success rates of companies that started with an existing project before they had a company versus ones who open sourced later? Because they're very different and they're
that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't have the answer to this question. What we've looked at in the sample of the 800 companies, there was a very large number of companies that didn't start with a project. So it's around at least 25% of them didn't have a GitHub repo when they started at seed stage. So they raised their seed, and at least 25% didn't have a project started. When you move to Series A, I think this number is close to 15%. So it's still a lot of companies that didn't even have a published repo that raised their Series A. So that's the numbers, right? But there is a bias where if you look at only the very successful ones, how many of them have started with a project before they even were companies? And if you do this, I think out of the 25 public company in open source today, I think most of them started with a very established community. If you look at Confluent, MongoDB, you have all those companies that started with a very, very dense, I think, community. So I think the next area of research for me is getting deeper into this, because it's already, I think, changed the way you look at company and you invest in them very early stage.
Thanks. Thank you for your question. Sam, I want to turn to some previous research that you've done. You and I have had the opportunity to work together before your time at Linux Foundation when you were at Harvard. And we jointly published a study on the big funding picture and where the money is actually flowing when it comes to open source. What did you learn about open source funding from that project?
Yeah, it actually is to give a little background to the study that Hilary's talking about, is we looked at how established companies are currently funding or paying their employees, either directly sponsoring their employees to work on open source, or they're working on open source as part of their job, or maybe they're donating to the Linux Foundation or providing other types of support. So this is one vector of money into the community. I think that complements another important flow of money into the community in terms of venture capital. And so I think both have different roles. One might be I'm supporting open source projects that are already established. I'm maybe a large telecom. I'm working on projects that financially benefit me. And in the venture capital space, it's almost like an incubating space for new ideas and new communities to grow. And it's another way, I think, of growing the pie. So I think understanding both flows of money into the community are important, and I think we've done that between those two reports. So.
Yeah, and I mean, based on this morning's keynote with Daniel Stenberg, we can do with a little bit more funding for people in the ecosystem. So we have 5 minutes left. And I have a funny feeling there might be some questions, so I don't think we're going to get through all the prepared ones. Is it okay if I take a question here from Boris? Sure. All right. My friend Boris from RTE.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Matthieu, a question. I work in a public company, so I don't know. I never faced a VC, and I didn't read the report. So I'm wondering, are the VCs concerned by the copyleft of your project, if it exists? And if yes, why? If no, why?
So the question is, are VC concerned with copyleft licenses, right? Okay. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think license strategy is a very late stage topic. It happens in two cases. The first one is you want to get protected against hyperscaler that want to kind of steal your business because they do a managed version of your product, and that happens when you're very big. So it's a very late stage thing. And the other case is when they don't have enough innovation to generate more revenue. So the only way they generate revenue is by squeezing the existing product with license change, right? So I think it doesn't concern VCs. And to give you an even like my answer to it, that when I talk to founders who think about license, I always tell them, you want to maximize adoption at this stage. You don't really care about license, so go with permissive license because it's what people understand. It's what's going through the legal department the most easy, and so just don't bother with it and go with permissive licenses.
Great. Terry?
So this morning you mentioned the finding that I found surprising, which is the correlation between funding and increase in contributors for the projects, because most of the VC-funded companies are single vendor, open source with like a relatively closed set of core developers. So that mean contributors in a very large sense, including users asking questions, or is it just code contributors?
It would include distinct code contributors who appear in the commit log. So these are distinct committers is the way that the contributor metric would be calculated. And not only just beyond contributors, there's organizational diversity that appears in the commit log as well. There's on average about 2 new distinct organizations are contributing to the project. So on the individual level, on the organizational level, meaningful contribution. This is not just I appear at the repository, ask a question and leave. I at least casually contribute, something like that.
Any other questions? Excellent.
Is there any correlation between getting funded and being incubated in a like LF or CNCF or something like this? Is there a correlation? Another question, please. For an angel investor, or smaller size tickets or investments, is there a way to figure out which project needs more help and can get there into a VC size opportunity?
Unfortunately, we don't have correlation for pre-VC companies, so that will be another area of research for the future, I think. As per your question on angel investing, I think it's you want to keep it very simple. It's just a software business, right? And it's the open source flavor is a thing, but are they building a great software business? And then distribution and open source is kind of a modality to it. I love open source. I invest specifically only on infrastructure software. Most of it is open source, but I still think that I'm looking at software companies. So it's going to be, is it a good business? Does it solve a very good pain? Is there a pricing power for this product? So those type of questions, I mean, it's the same.
And with just a couple minutes left, I'm going to take one more question.
I have a question regarding the community. When there are people contributing to your successful projects, is this companies or people who work for companies, or is it individuals that use these software? What are these?
It would be a mix of both, because we have a contributor metric at the individual level, distinct names, email combinations that appear in the commit log, but we also parse those domains or organizational affiliations that might appear on something like GitHub. So we both have individual contributor diversity and organizational contributor diversity increasing as the project scales and after funding rounds. So to answer your question, it's both of those things, if I understand correctly. They're on completely different scales. In percentage terms, I'd have to double check that, but it's something like 29% increase in contributors, and then about 2 new contributing organizations on average. All right. And so these are pooled on average effects. It's obviously going to differ from different project to different project. Yeah.
So that, I'd like to wrap our session. We're 2 minutes over time, and I really can't thank you all enough for sharing with us this afternoon. To Matt and Sam, just an outstanding research collaboration from the point of LF research. Your contributions to knowledge of open source and busting some myths apart about the relationship between commercialization and open source have been invaluable. And I'm really grateful for your contributions on the report and then here at our Birds of a Feather session today. So thanks, everybody. Go have a great night at the food hall.
Thanks, everyone.
tonight.